Okay, so we've got DNA, genes, chromosomes, bases as terms we've been dealing with for the last week or so. And then we're thinking about organization and sort of how these things fit together. Book, chapter, sentence, word. Going from largest thing down to the very smallest thing. So a book is made up of chapters. A chapter is made up of sentences. A sentence is made up of words. If you could put the DNA, gene, chromosome, base in the same kind of order, how would you do it? So you can just cut and paste and move those around. So what are bases? You built a DNA molecule yesterday. Which part of this was the bases? Yeah, these pieces of paper that fit together, that tie together those two sugar backbones, the sugar phosphate backbone. So these bases are the things that are actually connected down the center of a DNA molecule. So your bases are all of your A's and T's and G's and C's. Okay, those are your individual bases. So we've got those individual bases, and those four bases, A, T, C, and G, make up your entire genetic code. And those bases go into a long strand of DNA, and when we look at a little piece of that DNA, what we find here, what's a little short segment of DNA? Remember what those short segments are called? They're kind of like the sentences. Those short segments are called. So those little short segments of a long strand of DNA are called genes. And you can have lots of different genes in one section of chromosome. So there are multiple genes on a given section of chromosome. And I'm going to copy that. Oops, I got rid of my E by accident. Now my E is bigger. Oh well, I don't care. Oops. And those genes all exist within these incredibly long pieces of DNA. The copying and pasting that I was doing was to try to get you to see that it is this enormous chain. What did the guy in Crash Course say? How big would it be if you unfurled it all?
Bigger than him.
Well, yeah. He said something else. Something that stuck in my head. Miles of DNA inside every single cell in your body. Maybe not in every cell, but in your body. There are miles of DNA. So yeah, there are these long strands of DNA made up of all these little segments that are the genes. All of those little segments are just made of bases. And then where do chromosomes? So we've got DNA and genes and bases pretty much figured out. Where do chromosomes fit in? How do chromosomes fit in?
What makes up the genes?
So you're saying they're smaller than the genes. Do you remember the chromosomes you made? Where'd my chromosomes go?
Are they
These are this is a chromosome. So when we take nice big fat protein and we wrap it all in all that lovely DNA, because how do you keep something that long and that tangly organized? You have to organize it somehow. So the chromosome, remember, what is a chromosome? Protein and DNA all neatly packaged, and this makes your chromosome. Okay, so base pairs are the individual little tiny words. And genes are sentences. Genes are whole sentences. They have some kind of meaning. One strand of DNA might be what we think of as a chapter in a book. And your chromosome might be the whole book. Now, of course, you've got multiple books in every cell in your body because you have how many chromosomes? 46. You have how many copies of each chromosome in all your cells?
22.
Well, you have 20. You have 22 regular pairs and one pair of sex chromosomes. You have 23 pairs. How many of each chromosome do you have?
2.
2, because you got one from
1.
your mama, one from your papa. So in every cell in your body, with one exception, you have 2 copies of each, chromosome 1, chromosome 2, chromosome 3. And we talked about trisomies, where people have how many copies? Tri means 3. So we've talked about trisomy 21, where people have 3 copies of chromosome 21. Okay. Now, there was another term that came up in the other class, because I had them kind of toss out some terms. Is there a word that we've used in here in the last couple weeks that isn't up here? There's probably more than one, but there's one I'm thinking of that they said, well, then what's a blank? Is there anything here that you're looking at? So let this absorb for a second, and then I want to see if you come up with the same thing. So then what the heck is an allele? Here's what an allele is. Let's look, and we're going to have to shrink this. Well, let's see, how's the best way to do this? We'll take this DNA really sucked up a whole lot of space. So we'll shrink our DNA and our chromosome. And actually, we can just copy this section here like that. Well, I can do that and get rid of these. Cut. Okay, I'm going to shrink down my bases here. So within these 2 sections of DNA, within this gene that I have outlined in orange, you could read that genetic code. You could read those sentences. It's got, if you read down one side, GCGTTA. If you read down the other side, it's got CGCAAT, because they match. The base pairs always have to match specifically. Sometimes you will have a particular gene, and I mean this gene could code for anything. Oops, I want to expand this, not shrink it. Actually, let's just copy it to another page. That would be easier. We'll just copy that. Copy, take it over here, paste it, and expand it. So within this orange gene, and maybe this is a gene that codes for curly hair or not, Curly hair is all about the shape of the protein that makes up your hair shaft. And if the proteins that make up your hair shafts, I think triangular shafts give you curly hair, round shafts give you straight hair. So maybe in this one gene, these two letters can be different. So these two genes are the same, except at this one spot, you either get a TA or you get a GC. It's the same gene. It does the same thing. It builds a hair shaft. Or it, controls whether your body forms the proteins that clot your blood correctly. Or it controls, some other thing. It builds proteins that control some characteristic of you. And this one set of letters has two options. Because remember, what is an allele when we talked about alleles? Whoops. An allele is what? Two variations of a gene. It's two versions. It's a gene that has two versions of that gene. So the two alleles for eye color or hair color or, hair shaft shape are going to exist, if we look back to here, if that gene exists here on this chromosome, that gene is going to exist there on that chromosome, whether it's your chromosome or your chromosome or your chromosome. Because, for instance, you all have a gene that tells your cells how to build the protein that allows your blood to clot. And I don't think I have any hemophiliacs in here. I usually check the medical listings in the beginning of the year. So all of you have that same gene, and it occurs on whatever site, and that one's actually on the X chromosome. It's on one of the sex chromosomes. And that gene on the X chromosome tells your body how to build a protein that allows your blood to clot so you don't bleed to death with a paper cut. Pretty handy. Nice thing to have. Okay. So I want to talk now about, how many of you watched a crime show? I've asked this before. CSI or, Law and Order, any of those. And they always are looking for what at the crime scene? DNA. They're looking for DNA evidence. So, question I have for you. Is your DNA from a cheek swab on you the same as DNA that we might pull out of a piece of hair from your head? Yeah. Is it the same if we took a sample from your liver? Would that be the same DNA as what we scraped off your cheek? Okay. Would DNA from your liver be the same as DNA from your liver? Okay. Good. Good. We had some confusion about that earlier. Questions about sort of how these things are arranged? Because I was feeling very much like people didn't kind of get the big picture of the difference between bases, what's a gene, what's DNA. And I thought the videos would help, but I think some of you, I'm going to be frank, some of you really kind of just went, oh yeah, it's all about DNA. That's not what we're looking for. It's supposed to be like taking notes in a lecture, like really getting details. So what I'm going to have you do now, I'm going to give you a moment to look this over. Do you have questions? You've got a recall quiz to take. So before you go there, if you have questions, now would be the time to ask them. So that stem cell still has all of the DNA for every cell type in your body. What happens at differentiation basically is it's like a control room with a bunch of switches. And differentiation is going in and saying, okay, this switch off, this switch off, this switch on, this switch on, this one on. And that then means that every time this DNA is replicated, it's going to form a cell that can only do this or that can only fill up with oxygen. So it's going to specialize. But the stem cell still has all the DNA for the organism. It just hasn't limited its job prospects yet. It can become anything. And I think that's up to 128 cells from a fertilized egg. And again, whether that fertilized egg is a mouse, a daffodil, a maple tree, a dragonfly, a blue whale, a coyote, an earthworm, a ladybug, a flea, a pinworm. They're all the products of sexual reproduction. So they all start off as one undifferentiated cell. Okay. I would like you to go into Safari in the few minutes we have left, log into the student practice test, and go to the end of year exam for biology, grade 10 end of year exam for biology. The table shows sample cells taken from tissues of 2 individuals of the same species. DNA from each cell is analyzed using gel electrophoresis. You don't have to know what gel electrophoresis is. All you have to know is they ran the DNA. And the banding pattern is how you match DNA. So kind of like in those karyotypes, you can see stripes on the chromosome. When they run the entire DNA, they see a set of different color stripes. So the question is, which prediction will be supported by the results of the gel electrophoresis? So, in other words, what are they going to find? Pause. Okay. So we've got that nailed down. Here's a question I have for you. When we go back to looking at this, where do proteins fit in? Where do proteins fit into this picture? Because that's what we're going to start talking about on Monday is mutations and proteins. Because there are actually quite a few questions on... So you should have gotten some information on proteins from the videos that you watched and summarized. What's a protein?
The stuff that wraps around the chromosome?
The stuff that the chromosome is wrapped around, that's true, but there are other proteins in the body. What are you made of? Proteins. And you need protein because a lot of your cells are made of proteins of one kind or another. So if we go back to our analogy and we say that this is a word, sentence, the chapter, and the whole darn book. If that book is How to Bake Bread, with all the recipes for different kinds of bread in it, the lovely little loaf of bread that you produce for your ever so appreciative and impressed family, that's like the protein. Because the protein is what the DNA tells you how to make. It's what those genes tell you how to make. So it's what gets coded for. Man, I can't even spell bread. Oh well. So the protein is the thing that, this gene is a recipe for a loaf of bread. So each gene is a recipe for a particular kind or set of proteins. Does that make sense? Okay. So again, Monday we're going to talk more about mutants. Yay, mutants. And you all know, of course, the punchline that you're all a bunch of mutants, and I say that with all the love in my heart. I'm a mutant too. It's a good thing. I got a cute little mutant at home. So anyway.